Thank you, Christine and Carol, for both the invitation to be here and the importance of gatherings like this. I was very impressed in seeing the folks here, people from representing private collections, distributors, museums. I mean, the different forces that are engaging with this history and contemporary practices of the moving image. Now, my presentation is going to reflect on work selected from over 4 decades, describing, in a very small sample, I have a time period that I have to be sure to follow before red lights start flashing in my eyes, so put my watch here, how artists have worked with and responded to this changing medium, and how their work challenged and opened up. And I think this is very important: curatorial practice and museum exhibition, as well as the very commissioning of artwork. Now, in reflecting on the history of the presentation of video art, I think it's very important to recognize the variety, I stress that word, of forms that video took in the hands of artists. It was not a medium dominated by one form or format. It was also a discourse informed by its relationships to a variety of media and time-based art practices, including film, audio, and performance. There was a complex, what I like to call it, interplay, an interchange between these media art practices, reflecting on materials, what we're talking about largely, and also what I think is very important, the strategic, the goals that artists had in working with these media and materials. In addition, artists were transforming the technology itself and breaking the technical and content broadcast codes of television, as well as how and where video could be shown, setting into play the models and configurations of new media today. The distribution, the practices are a very interesting model in looking back to what we are facing in the changing media art, global media art programs of today. Now, in addressing the early exhibition of video, I think it's important to recognize, I want to identify a few things here, the critical role that the alternative space played in reimagining, supporting, and recognizing the expanded forms of video. My first image is of Shigeko Kubota's piece from her Duchampiana series, Duchamp's Grey, from 1975, here installed in the kitchen on Broome Street. And I stress this idea of the large space, the loft space where artists were working, but also where exhibitions were taking place, and this impact it was to have across this period on museum construction and on curatorial practice, and how artists were working with these media. And I'd also think it's very important, we've heard a mention of the NEA here for this conference, but the National Endowment for the Arts and New York State Arts Council in particular here had enormous roles across the 70s, 80s in terms of the support both for exhibition as well as production. And it's a very important context that I think we shouldn't forget. These programs around the country at alternative spaces, as well as university art galleries, were an important place for seeing new work. And for myself, and I'd just like to reflect a bit on this period, I was visiting with artists, spending time in their studios, discussing with them work in process and the issues that were informing work that were very important. But it was also the inspiration of these programs, of the alternative spaces, that really set for me the idea of turning the Whitney's program into a laboratory for new artwork, both as a commissioning and exhibition site. And we were also fashioning a diverse program, and I think this is important. Christine mentioned that the in-depth technical experience, that's important for you, but there's also this in-depth historical knowledge that I think is very important. Because because local communities were creating and working throughout the United States, and styles of moving image making from single channel to installation, sculpture, genres: documentary, narrative, image processing, abstract, performance-based, as well as a variety of visual formats were at play, and it was a very diverse field. So I'd like to continue now by describing how I first was developing the Whitney Museum's exhibition program in regards to how to regularly present video alongside film. And here's a little graphic I made. Congratulate me for this. This was in the mid-1970s that video was brought in on a regular basis into the program. And here, artist videotapes, and this is the exhibition space, about 38 feet or so by 30 feet wide. You would enter here with program notes and identifying, and then the idea was to show the same single-channel program. This is for the representation of single-channel tapes. The same program on all 4 monitors. The space hardwired with the technician in the booth, who then would monitor sound and color levels on the individual monitors, maintaining that quality. And the idea was then to have seating, a few seats in front of each, to maintain that kind of perspective to the monitor in terms of scale, so that you could, and when you come into the space, you could stand here without getting in anybody's sight lines, or choose to sit at one of the spaces, again, all showing the same program. So here, with a full-time technician maintaining the space, one was able to maintain these issues of color levels and sounds and image quality and respond to them. Now, in 1975, I did an exhibition featuring projected video, videotapes that were selected to be shown on the Advent projector, an early 3-gun video system, where the screen was part of the system. So your projector had to work with this screen, and your sight lines were limited, because if you moved outside into these areas, it would lose focus and color, and so it was a very limited system. But we got a tremendous response to this show, and what I found particularly interested in curating it was the idea of the scale of the projected image. It's very different from how artists were working on the monitor. In making their tapes, they were working on scale. So when a camera moved or something, it maintained a different quality, perceptual quality on the monitor. Projected, it suddenly the image shot by, it moved at a different rate. So it was the idea of how to curate, how to select work that would work in this early format of projection. And I think it's interesting to see this and think about this today as we increasingly see single-channel videotapes represented in high def and flat screens and installations and projections alongside installations in museum and other exhibitions. Now, in what follows, I'm going to give you a selection of artworks that I hope will further identify some of the key issues of the video medium. And I think it's very important to remember that closed circuit, artists remaking of video technology, projection, multimedia, and viewing environments were all issues that artists were engaging in. And just as I mentioned, the artist space, these were created by artists as activists. They were activists with the NEA, they were activists with the New York State Arts Council and foundations, and they were activists with us as curators, pushing us to do more. Now, I have not included event or performance or telecast pieces, which I think bear an interesting relationship to internet projects today, and perhaps we can address that in our discussion. So, but in any case, let me begin or continue with this installation at the Whitney of Beryl Corot's text and commentary from 1977. And what I wanted to stress here is how she handled the multi-channel video in creating the wall to mask the video images. In other words, creating a flat screen, if you will, out of the box of the monitor, anticipating, and this is again a subtext of much of what I want to be talking about, how artists were anticipating, pushing, and wanting this medium to change and become the flat screen. And this was a way for an artist to directly refashion the technology in terms of controlling its presentation and reception. Now, we all know about one of the distinctive features, which I've mentioned, of video, was that one could see in real time on the monitor what the camera was recording. I mean, this is so basic, but it was very important. It was something that distinguished video from film, obviously, but it really informed a range of artistic, creative practices. And in 1979, I did an exhibition called Revisions, Projects and Proposals in Film and Video at the Whitney, which featured film installations alongside video installations, site-specific pieces that responded to the museum, in the case of the videos, pieces, with photographic pieces and drawings and plans by the artists. They all, in the case of video, employed closed circuit, Buki Schwartz, Bob Watts, and Bill Byrne. And these were shown alongside film installations, also created in many parts on-site with photographs and drawings by Bill Anastasi, Michael Snow, and Morgan Fisher. The point of the exhibition was to distinguish this difference in the medium and the material of film and video and how it informed different configurations and working with media. But the piece that I want to, just to look at one piece because of my time, is Bill Byrne's Rumor and Innuendo, which was shown in that exhibition. And part of the show was this plan of Marcel Breuer's for his Whitney Museum. And there were 4 audio sites in public spaces and 4 closed-circuit video sites. And these were located throughout the museum. And the idea was to identify where the surveillance was. Here's the microphone, marking the space that was being picked up by the microphone and a label identifying it. And here we see the camera, in this case, looking down into the corner of the lobby. And this was pursued throughout the space in the between floors. And the idea was not to hide the camera or the microphone, make them visible. Describe the space that's being covered. And he invited actors that he instructed to perform as the public would in these spaces. So the lines between performance and, quote, reality were unmarked. And the idea of identifying the surveillance was not to hide the camera. So here, here's my office with the microphone, a label, picking up the conversation. And this was a colleague's office with the closed-circuit camera. And mail would be sent in that would be picked up in terms of the piece. And here in the restaurant area of the Whitney, and again, just identifying here, there's a label telling you that this is the space, which is also marked, and which would then be seen on the 4 monitors in the exhibition, representing the 4 surveillance cameras, and the speakers representing the 4 audio spaces identified in the museum. So here's an installation using closed circuit, bringing this all into the exhibition space, site-specific, and again, engaging with this sort of plastic notion of the medium, and again, very distinctive to what video is as a medium at this time. Now, it's important, and when we're talking about these technologies, to remember that artists were remaking the technology, modifying cameras and decks, monitors, and this really dates back to Pike's first transformation of the television set in 1963, Wolf Fostel's early performative interventions into television, the image processors of the late 1960s, the feedback experiments of the early 70s, to net art and new media combinations today. This is the work of Al Robbins from 1980, and a very interesting artist who transformed and reworked the camera, the positions of the monitors, and the reception. These sound responding configurations with the cameras, and his writings, this is called Anti-Catastrophe, it showed the issues that he was exploring. And again, the issue of the textual relationship of artists' writings to their art practice, I think, is very important and recognized here in this exhibition. So here we see now how do we recover what was his reworking of the video system. Again, these are all parts of it wasn't just benignly handed to the monitor. He was reworking the whole system in fashioning this installation. Now, as I was thinking about this issue of single-channel videotapes and how they can be encoded and represented in exhibitions, I also wanted to show some examples of how artists have really reflected on this very idea of the presentation of videotapes, both in terms of enclosures that engage the public-private notion of the medium in the scale of the monitor, and in terms of the viewer's physical position and the reception of the monitor's screen and program. This is Dan Graham's 3-link cubes, interior design for space viewing video from 1986. Like his pavilions, outdoor, indoor pieces, this is a work that creates these spaces both transparent as glass and mirrored, so they become both public and private. Earphones and these cushions in which to sit and look at the various programs in this kind of this angular distribution of these viewing spaces. So this is a work here we see installed in an exhibition called Rooms with a View, Environments for Video, that I co-curated with Nancy Spector at the Guggenheim Museum, Soho, in 1997. And for that exhibition, Vito Akanchi created Teleferny's system, which was commissioned, as I said, for the exhibition. And here, Vito was looking at creating this structure that you would enter into, climb, position yourself horizontally, vertically, seated in this structure in relationship to different size monitors and different programs of video, very radically opening up the idea of the flexibility of the medium, but also flexibility in terms of the reception of the single-channel tapes. These are all, we made a selection of tapes that surveyed performance and various uses of video, single-channel work in this installation. So these sites are where the artist is actually, artist is thinking about where their work is shown, how their work can be shown, what kind of architectures can be developed. Now, bringing myself up to the Guggenheim, this was the centerpiece of the 2000 retrospective of the Worlds of Nam June Paik. This is in Frank Lloyd Wright's great rotunda. And Nam June, I wanted to show this piece because what I'm trying to sort of describe here is changing modes of representation, both as installation and ways of thinking about single-channel work. And here's an artist who plays such a powerful role in that history, and he called this a post-video work, installation entitled Modulation in Sync, that brought together the idea of both responding to this, to the rotunda, but also to different forms of presentation. Here's projected video from his television, video pieces, the distribution of videos on monitors face up. So here, all these instruments are being used and deployed. And here, with these forms of projection, the changing ability and the flexibility of projection from that advent to this, where the luminosity could be maintained in this ambiently lit space. The idea was not to turn this into a black cavern. It was to open it up so that you could see the textures of the architecture and you could have multiple points of view to the work, looking down on the monitors as we see here and following the laser projection, which is what he saw as electronic means of distribution, communication that's moving beyond video and television. So it's going through this 7-story waterfall as the sound of the water comes down, goes into the pool, and the laser then follows up to the oculus, where another laser is projecting abstract forms, geometric forms that echo Namjoon's earliest image processing. So he's sort of, in a sense, collapsing television, single channel, installation, all these elements into this thinking piece about a video and the moving image. But my real point in showing this too is the enormous flexibility that video has taken on. We all know this, but it becomes a means for this kind of dramatic transformation. Now, one of the issues that I was asked to address was high definition projection, and the idea of large projection that really has been enhanced by these digital technologies. This is Bill Viola's Going Forth by Day from 2002, commissioned by the Deutsche Guggenheim Berlin. This is where we see it being installed. My point here is that Bill saw this piece, which unfolds in 36 minutes or so, as entering into a cinema, entering into a film, a three-dimensional experience of all these projections unfolding in time together. But the beauty of it was that you could project this onto the wall directly without distortion. And there was a luminosity. It was created for this high-def digital projection system with a quality of projection that has really been unimagined. Another topic is how this kind of projection can distort different forms of earlier video. We can talk about that. But here the artist is in the medium. This is the way he wants to work. And he's created this piece, and we see the two ends of the gallery with this continuous projection that he was able to align, three projectors, and the size and so forth of this richly imaginative work. Now, so we're following in this 30-minute presentation of how video has changed and both the capacities of the medium and how artists are able to work with it, and drawing from my experience of working with different artists and projects. And I wanted to conclude with an exhibition entitled Watch This, which I'm doing with the Smithsonian American Art Museum, opening later this year. And really what is able to happen here, which was really unimaginable earlier, is the mix of different media in this exhibition space. The entrance where we can have Korezawa 3D projection, Jim Campbell's modified screen development of his singular work with the resin screen that he created being shown here. The flat screen presentation, Marina Zerkow. But this is in dialogue with Cathode Ray 2 piece of Peter Campus and Namjoon Pike, and Corey Archangel's VCR projection, a Panasonic projector, drawing from the archive, if you will, of the internet. Svetlana Igor Kopitsyansky's captured film on a plasma screen, along with Bill Viola's diptych, again using flat panels and plasma screens. So here, in this traditional museum space, able to mix without entering into total darkness, but an ambience light, different modalities of working with video fashioned by the artists and working through and with different systems. In conclusion, I want to stress that the history, I'm convinced of 20th century art is going to be rewritten through the moving image. Film, video, television, interactive, net art, video games, they've impacted on all of the arts, and they're becoming art forms themselves. And that history, in all of its complexity, has to be recovered. And I think that process is going to be even more urgent as we become a media culture, as the pervasive presence of the moving image in all different forms will bring this history up. And reflecting back over the history of video art, I think it's important to recognize, as I keep stressing here, the complexity of its history, the multiple strands of genre, narrative, and conceptual developments that inform it. And today, within our ever-expanding media culture, time-based art is made up again of a variety of mutating and changing discourses where artists choose to work with a medium that best expresses their ideas. And this goes in both into traditional media as well as electronic and other forms, where these ideas and self-reflection inform a variety of visual, textual practices. And I think this is the challenge that you face in conservation and preservation, is that textual nature of that work, the nature of that material and what it was, and how to maintain an understanding and interpretation of it. These both, and what interests me in so much of the work that we're seeing and we see with the Haunted Show is the recovery of earlier video, where artists remake analog forms, as well as artists working with digital computer and based custom programs and file storage. So there's an enormous range of reflection. And the movement from the monitor across this history to the black box, to high definition, flat screens, distribution and access to the virtual archive online has seen both changes in our practice as well as very interesting continuities across media, forms, and formats. The challenge to the museum will be their ability to effectively represent the past, as they must remain open to the present and future. This is a real, in my mind, a real question. Maintaining the relevance of these institutions, they'll be superseded in terms of representing this changing history as we go into the future. And I think that these issues are important for our discussion in today's and tomorrow's program as we examine and reflect on video art and its reception. Thank you very much. Oh, yes.
If anyone would like to ask John a question, if you could come up to the mics, which are here. You must come up here to ask the questions, and he'll be happy to answer them.
Well, I always enjoy questions. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a question, it just be an observation about what I've said. And, you know, presenting and talking about all this to a group that's, you know, knowledgeable and works with this a lot is difficult because I don't want to say the obvious. But I think it's very important in looking back, and personally looking back in terms of a curatorial practice and looking back over changes to these institutions, that one of the issues that I concluded with was my concern over this memory, haunted, if you will, by the past and how we're going to represent and understand it, both curatorially in terms of interpretation and curatorially in terms of installation. Yeah.
I just have a comment, which is that I think a very important point that you're emphasizing is the issue of connoisseurship of the installation, of the original installation intent versus what you might interpret it to be installed as now. And it's been a point of curiosity for me and I think that that's what today's and tomorrow's workshop is about, is developing that connoisseurship for the people who are going to be handling these items from a installation and preservation standpoint rather than from a curatorial standpoint. So that's just this buildup of connoisseurship is an important issue, I think, for us to address.
Thank you. I think they're really, there's, that's where in the project that Carol was describing here, having interviews with artists whose work has come into the collection, detailed documentation of terms of the artist reflecting on how it was to be installed and the issues that one might confront in the future being presented to the artist. I mean, some artists could care less. I mean, there's the opportunity, things change. And I think for me, this, I just don't want the issue of connoisseurship to be limiting, and I want there to be an openness to work in terms of how it can be presented. But what I often find that I wish was stronger was a deeper understanding of the past in terms of the variety of ways that artists worked. And I kept stressing that in my presentation. And for me today, the big challenge is new work. I mean, how do you present new work? And that it's changing and shifting, being shown in different sites, being shown online. These are the modalities that, for me, are where where work is going to be configured in combination with writing and physical forms. I mean, just is somebody waiting to ask? Once I get talking, anyway, I just had this local experience up in Western Massachusetts. I went to this bookstore, and they were projecting this Romanian film, widescreen. I said, "Oh, that's great. Where did you get this?" He said, "Oh, we're just streaming it online." In other words, that work online became this cinema in this bookstore where I could sit, look at books, and enjoy this film. It's not exactly what the film was. It's not medium specific to film anymore, but it is a representation of it. And I think that sort of dynamic fluidity of this virtual archive is, for me, very exciting and important.
Thank you, John. That was great, a great talk. I really appreciate being reminded about the role of artists in creating the sort of conventions of installation and presentation, and the role of artist spaces as well. And I'm just wondering where you think the materials are, and as you say, there needs to be more written about those specific topics, and I think where you think that material exists and how it might be mined by people. And also I was wondering where you think if there were sort of moments where you think those conventions became, where the museum, the sort of agency changed perhaps from so much from the artist to the museum.
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting bundle of questions. I mean, one of the goals of my career has been to integrate the moving image fully into the museum, both in terms of exhibition, collection, and education, and to respond to these flexibility and multiplicity of forms. And I find that go back to the original ephemera, the distribution catalogs, the announcements. We're doing this with the Namjoon Pike Archive in Washington, finding very interesting textual information on how work was shown and how it was represented and understood. It's very interesting to think, I mean, one of the challenges that traditional art historians have is, well, if it's a moving image, you can't, it's changing, and how do you talk about it? How do you write about it? How do you analyze it? And this is very interesting to see how that work in the early and different points across the history of the moving image was described, articulated, represented, and how that, I mean, shot analysis in film was a form of analysis, Forca pitch, and then it became a form of presentation, Ken Jacobs. I mean, the idea of working with a medium, and the same thing with video, too. And I think that the big impact that I've seen on museums was the loss of public funding. I can't stress that enough. That the support that came to, from private foundations also, but from public funding. And one of the reasons New York State has been so strong in media is that because it had a very strong state arts council that was panels of artists selecting, supporting work, supporting exhibitions. And this was a form of support that enabled media art centers across the country, touring of work, and artists moving their work around, before the internet, of course. But my point is, it was supported by this public funding. The collapse of public funding and the movement of the expanded presence of the galleries, the art world industry, if you will, the pressure of this and both on terms of on curators as well as boards. Boards are made up of collectors, folks. And this has an impact on what often happens in terms of what's recognized, shown, and the pressure this has also on a kind of limited history. People tend to know what they know. Well, if you know a particular period, galleries are supporting it, collectors know it, museums are showing it, it can remain more static. And the double bind on this was that museums began to see themselves as architecture, not as places to be curatorially perhaps as challenged as they might be in terms of representing diverse histories and contemporary practices. And how can you in some of these buildings? I mean, I'm not anti-architecture, but I'll tell you, it's when real estate becomes the raison d'etre of the museum, you have a problem, both in filling it. Well, we have to fill it with things that we know. So I'm going into some detail about a change, and this is a change that's happened over the past few decades, and it's also the impact of art schools, who's teaching how these practices are being represented, and how diversities can be maintained, and how the global picture is framed. So there are these enormous changes that happened subtly but profoundly over the past decades. And the goal that we have as curators is to maintain our integrity and to be inquisitive to new work and to reinvestigate the history and enable it, and for conservation to make that possible. Not to limit what the curators can do, because it, I mean, that's been my whole, Carol was wonderful. I mean, that was the big change. What is this? Well, it's something you don't know, but you should. And so that became a change that occurred. And I have a flashing red light, which you can't see, but I can, which tells me I think I'm finished. Thank you very much.